Well, this morning, we are going to be in our second week of our Money Talk series. Here's our title for this morning. It's Intentionally Living God's Dream for You. And let me just emphasize a few words in that. Intentionally living God's dream for you. That's what we're about this morning. And this is part 2 of the Money Talk series. Part 1, and really, the heart of this series is we're learning how to live all of our lives, more of our lives under God's lordship. That being followers of Jesus and with Jesus as our Savior and Lord, that doesn't just refer to the part of our lives, the compartment that we think of as spiritual, but the invitation and the expectation is actually for all of our life. And to discover that when we bring all of our lives, when there's not a room that's closed to Him, that we discover His ways are good. And specifically, so this, we're talking about money. So last week we looked backward to week 1, was about becoming aware of our personal stories. Those are the experiences we had, most likely in our family of origin, that have shaped us. And sometimes without even realizing that we've been very shaped, the way we approach money, the way we think about it, the anxieties we feel, the pressures we feel, that much of that is unconsciously affected by the family of origin. So last week we were looking at that. We were trying to surface those things because we have to be aware of those things so that we're not negatively impacted by them. That message is on our website. If you missed it, I would encourage you to go pick it up because it's part of a foundation that we're building on. The reality is money and finances occupy a tremendous amount of our lives. What we do with our work week, what we think about when we are concerned about things, so much of our life. And last week we took a poll, and of the people who responded to that poll last week, we found out that almost 60% of the room, or people joining online as well, almost 60% of the people that responded grew up in a family where they just didn't talk about it. And then there's the other 40%, and many of them had very negative experiences. Yeah, we talked about it, but it was with a lot of shouting, right? And tension. And so what we're wanting to do is talk about that, and talk about it not just as Americans, but as followers of Jesus. So we're going to be doing that this week. This week, last week we were looking backward. This week we're going to be looking forward, and we're going to be talking about dreaming about the life that God has called us to, the life that He has appointed for each of us. Here's the key timeless truth for this week. I'm just going to put this up here and then we'll unpack a little bit. Here's the timeless truth. It's that having a dream, or maybe vision, you can think about it that way, having a dream for your life empowers financial intentionality. Having a dream empowers financial intentionality. So let me give you an example. Many of us either have already received or will be receiving over the next few weeks a tax return. Hopefully you're not getting a tax bill. I would much rather be in the camp that gets a tax return, right? But all of a sudden you've got this kind of influx of, if you get a tax return, of expendable income that's not part of your normal budget and all of that. And you have a choice what to do with that. Now, if you don't have a dream for your life, if you don't have any plan, then it's really easy to spend that without much thought, right? You might Costco's got a sale on big screens, and it's about time that we upgrade our flat screen, better technology, bigger picture, better color, more pixels, and you could spend the whole thing right there. And the reality is, if you have a dream and you have a plan, and that's guiding your decisions, it might shape the way you think. It might give you self-control, or what we put here is delayed gratification. So here's what delayed gratification looks like. It looks like maybe I think, I've got this influx, and if I choose to spend it on something like paying off debt, maybe the dream is that I want to be out of debt so that the money that I'm putting right now to servicing our debts could be saved to do something really special for our family. Maybe we want to take a once-in-a-lifetime vacation that is completely, we can't even dream about it right now. But if that is our dream, then maybe we use the influx of the tax return to pay off credit card debt, to pay off the HELOC, to pay off the student loan. Don't pay off the student loan right now. But you see what I'm saying, right? So If you have a dream, it helps you to have self-control. So with that in mind, what you might decide is, you know what? We can get by for a couple more years on this flat screen because we actually want to spend that money on something else. See how having a plan shapes intentionality? So that works with big ticket items. It also works with actually just the daily expenditures, which are maybe even more powerful. Because there's the daily choice of like, well, instant gratification says stop and get something to eat at the restaurant right now and spend $40, when if I have a plan and I actually am saving for something intentional, reality is I can go home and delay my gratification and fix something for $10. And I can put that $30 towards something else. So this is the type of thing we're thinking about. This is how having a plan for your future shapes the decisions you're making today. And it's incredibly powerful. So this is what we're talking about. Let me telegraph as we get into this an opportunity that's coming up. So we have a save the date here. On Saturday, this is a 4-part series that we're in right now. On Saturday, May 11th, from 9 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. in the chapel, so it's kind of a morning workshop, we're gonna have a workshop that builds on the foundation of everything we're talking about. Because at the front end of this series, I promised that this series was gonna be helpful, but what I didn't promise is that it was gonna be quick. Right? Because the reality is what we're talking about is financial habits, and those are deeply ingrained, and if we're gonna change those, that's gonna take time, and it's gonna take laying a good foundation. So this idea of looking back and thinking, what are the things that have shaped me? What am I living out of and making my choices out of? And then also looking forward and thinking about, what is my dream for my life? What do I really want? Those are the foundation that are gonna enable us to then take some practical tools and have them be really effective. So on that day, it's a free workshop with some very specific practical tools to help you plan for your financial situation. And I would encourage you to save the date on that because all of this is foundational and that's gonna help us move it forward. So lastly, one more QR code. This is the QR code for we have basically a web page for this series that has our resources on it. And so if you're online, that has the worksheet that we got handed out today on campus. We'll hand these out later if you didn't get one. But it has that. It also has a place for Q&A. And so if in this series you have a question that you haven't heard us address yet, I would love to have you submit that question because we really want this series to be helpful. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna address those questions along the way as we go, and then we're gonna provide some space for some Q&A at the end. And we're actually gonna address those questions corporately together. So that's a good place to give feedback and even testimonies. If something's really helping you, you can do that there. So here's the thing. When we come to our Sunday gathering, we have daily devotions that Pastor Mike's writing for us that have us in biblical texts about money so that we're training our thinking to reflect biblical truth about money. On Sundays, what we're doing is each one of these series, we're gonna be looking at one of Jesus' parables. And what we want is to be shaped by things that Jesus said and allow those to shape our thinking and our hearts and the way that we live out our lives. And here's the reason why. This is the reason why we're doing this. Because one, stories are really powerful. And secondly, so are these principles. This principle I just gave you about having a dream can help you to have make better choices, have self-control, delay gratification. That is a timeless truth that works regardless of whether or not you're a follower of Jesus. You can take that out there with a completely humanistic, secular worldview, and it will work. It's powerful because it's true. But if you're a follower of Jesus and you're filtering that truth through the lenses of being a follower of Jesus and what's his dream for your life, then it becomes even more powerful, right? That's why we're gathered here. We're gathered as followers of Jesus. We're not just trying to have better financial principles. We're figuring out how to be better disciples and to experience the joy and abundant life that he promises, right? So the question is, today we're gonna be in a parable. And it is the parable of the Good Samaritan. It's in Luke chapter 10. You can turn there. Reminder about the nature of parables. Parables usually include an unexpected twist that catches the listener off guard. As Jesus is telling these parables, people get sucked into the story, and especially his original audience, because there was something about the story that was very familiar to them. He used familiar environments, familiar kind of plot lines, but then there would always be this plot twist that they would get caught by, surprised by. It would catch them off guard, and the thing that it did is it exposed something internal. It exposed something in their heart. And the invitation was not for that to be exposed, but for them then to respond to the truth that Jesus was announcing. Okay, so we're going to look for that. As we listen to this this parable today, listen for the plot twist that exposes hearts, and we'll be in Luke chapter 10, beginning in verse 25. And behold, a lawyer stood up to put him to the test, saying, "Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" He said to him, "Well, what's written in the law? How do you read it?" Now, when we hear law and lawyer, we think of modern day attorneys and legal practices, all of that. A little bit different in their day. This lawyer his area of practice and specialty would not be civil law, it would be religious law. So when it's talking about law there, it's talking about the law of Moses, right? He's an expert in the law of Moses, which is basically the first 5 books of the Hebrew scriptures. So we can be pretty sure that when he asks this question of Jesus, it's not a question that he doesn't already know the way he would answer to it, because it says it's a test, right? Whenever you give a test, you know what the answer is, right? At least what he wants the answer to be. So that was a question that was actually pretty commonly debated in his circles among the lawyers, the scribes, the Pharisees. They debated this question. And basically at the heart of it was, if you take the Old Testament, the Hebrew scriptures, and you look at the 613 laws that are found there. At that time, they had numbered all of the instructions to 613. Well, of the 613, which one is the most important? And they love to debate about this, right? It was a pretty common debate. We see that in other places in the Gospels. So he wants to test Jesus, and Jesus turns the question back on him. The interesting thing is, as much as he wants to test Jesus, he also really wants to show how clever he is, right? So he allows the question to be turned back on him. And so we find that he gives the answer in verse 27. He says, "Well, you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." So love God and love people, right? At the end of the day, that's what it is. Jesus said to him, "You have answered correctly. Do this. Do this, and you will live." But he, desiring to justify himself, said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus goes on to a third passerby. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, meaning the man who was bleeding out. When he saw him, he had compassion. He went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. And then he set him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. The first 2 had gone around. This guy moves towards him. He says he's moved by compassion. Just take note of that word compassion, because we're going to circle back to it in a minute. But Jesus introduces a third passerby. In his parable, he just calls it a Samaritan. Probably in your Bible, if you turn to Luke 10, there's a paragraph heading and it probably calls it the Good Samaritan, right? Jesus didn't say that because his audience wouldn't have a framework for Good Samaritan, right? That was a contradiction in terms. That was an oxymoron. That was that was a disconnect, a dichotomy, like all the things, because there was great hostility between the Jewish people and the Samaritans, and there was hatred, there was animosity, and it was reciprocated. It was from both sides. There was actually a culture war. We'll use our language from today. There's a culture war going on between the Samaritans and the Jews that sometimes turned into a war where there was actual fighting. Sometimes Josephus tells us that sometimes Rome had to intervene to stop the fighting between 2 of their occupied peoples, which were the Samaritans and the Jews. Listen to what N.T. Wright. N.T. Wright's a historian, biblical historian. He says this. He said this in 2001. He didn't say this last week. He said this in 2001. "The hatred between Jews and Samaritans had gone on for hundreds of years, and it's still reflected tragically in the smoldering tension between Israel and Palestine today. Both sides claimed to be the true inheritors of the promises to Abraham and Moses. Both sides, in consequence, regarded themselves as the rightful possessors of the land." Which means, if Jesus was telling this parable today, standing in Israel, he would say, well, a priest came by and he swerved out of his way. A Levite came by, he swerved out of his way. And then along came a Palestinian. And he moved with this broken Jewish man in compassion. Remember, Jesus, his his parables always had a plot twist that exposed people's hearts. And the reality is, as Jesus is telling this parable, he's not only telling it to the lawyer, he's telling it to his disciples who are all standing around. They're the first level of kind of audience for this thing. And they've just had a personal encounter with this racial animosity, meaning Jesus and his 12 disciples and the others that traveled with them. There's usually a kind of a posse, for lack of a better word, traveling with Jesus. And they had just had an encounter with this tension. You find it in Luke 9. This is just like a few paragraphs before this thing where Jesus is telling the parable. Luke 9, when the days drew near for Jesus to be taken up, his face was set to go to Jerusalem. And he sent messengers ahead of him who went and entered a village of the Samaritans to make preparations for him. But the people did not receive him because his face was set toward Jerusalem. This is the moment in Luke's gospel when Jesus pivots from his public ministry and everything he'd been doing up north in Capernaum and heads south, and he begins his deliberate march to Jerusalem and everything that awaits him there. This is the moment. And the most direct route, you can see this on a map, the most direct route between where he was in Capernaum and Jerusalem, where he's heading, is north-south to, let's make that full size if we can. Capernaum's up north. You see the red line. The most direct route would be to go down through Samaria, which is there. It's the green part. But you see that he stops and he goes over to the side and then comes down the east side of the Jordan River, not through Samaria. And then look at the bottom of that map. What he does is he gets to the bottom, then he crosses over to Jericho and then to Bethany and to Jerusalem. Okay? So that's a map of the route that Jesus took. But what had happened is he was heading south. He sends his kind of advanced team to go, we need a place to stay for the night. We need, lodging. We need food. He sends an advanced team. And the Samaritans are like, nope, no soup for you. You are not welcome here, because they found out that he's Jew and he's traveling to Jerusalem with intentions of, whatever, and they want nothing to do with it. So there's the animosity, but the key for us this morning is not what happened then, it's how Jesus' disciples responded. Because Jesus is doing something when he's telling this parable, he's exposing not only the heart of the lawyer who asked it, he's exposing the heart of his followers and the disconnect between his heart and theirs. He was prepared to go right through Samaria because he was like that. Most Jews would have gone around like he ended up doing. They wouldn't have even tried. Jesus was moving towards them with compassion, right? Here's what happened. When that happened, when they were rejected, when they said, yeah, we don't have any room for you. Verse 54 of 9. When his disciples, James and John, saw it, they said, Lord, do you want us to tell fire to come down from heaven and consume them? But he turned and rebuked them. Okay? He turned and rebuked them. And they went on to another village. If this wasn't so tragic, it would be comical. Because that's not proportional response, right? Yeah, we don't have any room for you. Oh yeah? Fire and brimstone, right? Annihilation then. What? Here's the thing, church, and there's a reason why we're in this series on money, but we're listening to these parables, because we need our hearts to be shaped by the very things that Jesus challenged others' hearts with. His disciples were being formed. This is part of their formation process, which was to recognize that they'd been shaped by the culture war, and they were just a part of it. They were reflecting the culture, and Jesus is like, no, you're here to be an alternative to the culture, not an echo of it. And that's the invitation that we have today. Jesus' followers are called to be a revolutionary alternative. Sometimes we talk about the kingdom of God as being an upside down kingdom. Actually, the kingdom of God is a right side up kingdom. Everything else is upside down. And what Jesus just exposed is this whole tension that's just reciprocating for generations now. That's a human kingdom. And Jesus has got something much different in mind. So back to the parable, where the Samaritan has just picked up his Jewish victim on the side of the road. And what does he do? He goes through it pretty quickly, but it says he tends to his wounds. He puts him on, he gets off of his animal, puts him on the animal, and gives him a ride to the next town. And he gets to an inn where he pays for him to stay for the night. And then this Samaritan, this Palestinian, stays with him all night to care for his wounds as he's groaning and moaning through the night. This is acting on compassion. Here's what happens. The next day, he, meaning the Samaritan, he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, "Take care of him. Whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back." This is legal language. Craig Keener, he says that this is legal language. "I will repay" was a standard way to guarantee a debt. In other words, he left his debit card, because this guy is not living on credit at this point. He leaves his debit card and says, "Whatever else you need, I'll cover it." Blank check. The thing that's going on here is compassion. This is compassion in action. And compassion, the reason I highlighted that word back when it said that the Samaritan moved towards him with compassion was because last week in the parable of the Good Samaritan, where we had this father who saw his prodigal son coming from a long ways off, the father was moved with what? Compassion. In other places that aren't like parables and stories, we're told that Jesus had compassion. It's all the exact same Greek word. It's a Greek word I can't pronounce. You can ask Pastor Mike. But like when it says that Jesus saw the crowds and they were like sheep without a shepherd, and he moved with them towards compassion. Or when he said that these people have been with me for 3 days and they've had nothing to eat, I have compassion for them, feed them. It's all the same word, and it's a deep word that comes from like the guts. Like, I feel for these people, and I don't just want to feel, I want to move towards it with action, right? That's the word happening here. So there's Jesus' plot twist. Once again, it has to do with unexpected, unearned, and unconditional love in ways that turn the human ecosystem upside down. We need to be shaped by these stories. They need to be shaped by these stories. This is how it wraps up the conversation with the lawyer. Verse 36, which of these 3, now Jesus is asking the question. Earlier, he was asking the question, now Jesus is asking the final question. He says, which of these 3 do you think proved to be the neighbor? Remember the question was, well, then who is my neighbor? If I'm supposed to love my neighbor as myself, who do I need to do that to? Jesus says, well, which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? And the lawyer said, the one who showed him mercy. He can't bring himself to actually say the Samaritan. The one who showed him mercy. Jesus said to him, you go and do likewise. I think it's so fascinating the disciples are silent on this whole thing. We know because of where they've just come from and where they're going. They're probably on the road to Jericho. The very next paragraph after this has Jesus arriving in Bethany, which is on the other side of Jericho. They're literally on this road right now as he's telling the story. And they've just come from a confrontation with the Samaritans where they were ready to throw down. And Jesus is exposing their hearts. And the fact that the dream that he wants them to live from is not the dream that they're ready to live from. And so this all begins with a heart change. If you think about what it's going to require for them to be able to go and do likewise, in other words, go and do things like that. And we don't all have this, we're not all confronted with that opportunity, but that thing of seeing a need and being able to move towards it with compassion, Jesus says, go do things like that, right? But in order to do that, there's some key things that have to happen. First of all, we have to have hearts that are formed with compassion. If we're acting out of selfishness, if we're acting out of duty, if we're acting out of what it looks good on the outside, that's not going to be adequate. We see that because the priest and Levite, when no one was watching, when they weren't on the clock, they hadn't been formed by God's compassion on the inside. And so when they saw an opportunity, they swerved around it and let themselves off the hook. Why? They didn't have compassion, right? That's missing. But in addition, and so we don't know how this Palestinian had that kind of like racial injustice turning compassion. We don't know how he got there, but he had been formed that way. But not only had he been formed that way, he had the capacity to do something. So had he, let's say he had lived in so much debt or was in so much poverty himself that he had no financial resources, he would have been very limited in what he could do. It was because of the way that he had lived to that moment that he was free to actually do something. That's why we're talking about this, because the question is, he's probably said no to some things in his life. He hasn't spent all of his resources on himself because he has the freedom to move towards this moment with compassion. That's what we're talking about in this dream, this idea of dreaming. So here's what we're going to do this morning. We're going to shift to a poll question, and I'm going to invite our money specialists. These are James and Amberlee. They are our financial coaches who are guiding these stages. So James and Amberlee are going to come up. As they do that, we're going to put a poll up here. And this is an instantaneous poll. It just asks one question, and all you have to do is pull up that with your camera using a QR code. And it's going to ask you the question, when was the last time that you seriously dreamed about your future and what you want your life to look like? Okay? When was the last time that you seriously dreamed about your future and what you want your life to look like? So quickly take that poll. You can do it if you're online. You can do it if you're in the room. We're going to get instant results on this because we want to empower one another and encourage one another to dream. Vote. All right. This is pretty cool, actually. Right now, with not all the results in, but as they're coming in with the trending, is that 90% have said that I've dreamed within the last year. That is fantastic. That is an incredible foundation that we can build upon. Now, the challenge for us is to, as disciples of Jesus, not only dream ourselves, but ask God what his dream is. So James and Amberlee, why don't you take it from here?
Yeah. Thank you, Trevor. Well, last session, we talked about money stories, right? And how that money story the messages that you have growing up, how that can form your money story, and how that money story can affect the way that you interact with your money. What I want you to understand is that the rest of your story has not been written yet. And so you can determine what the rest of your money story looks like. And today we're going to do a little exercise to help you kind of walk into that. It can include compassion when it comes to spending money. It can include looking around and seeing what your neighbors need and helping with that. This has been a really fun story. So the story of the Good Samaritan is a very actionable parable. So like Trevor talked about, the lawyer was trying to kind of get around helping people that he didn't want to help. But what Jesus says is, you got to love your neighbor. And you have to go and do likewise. What does your go and do likewise look like? Maybe you don't know, and that's okay. Because we're going to take some time today and we're going to try to flesh that out and figure it out. The reality is, though, the Good Samaritan, he had intentionality. Had he not been intentional with his resources, he would not have had the resources to help this guy out. Had he not been intentional with his time, with his calendar, he would not have been able to. He was interruptible. So we need to get to a place where we're interruptible with our finances, interruptible with our money and our schedule. The reality is we don't really know what his finances look like from a deep dive, but we do know that he had money to give in the immediate. He gave time in the immediate, but he also had money that he was able to give and come back and pay for the needs that arose. And so there was this deep sense of intentionality. Otherwise, he wouldn't have that money. And if we want to be able to look around and meet the needs of those around us, we have to be intentional. We've got to be intentional with our money. We have to be intentional with our time.
Yeah, and could you imagine if all of us lived like the Good Samaritan? If Christians throughout the world saw a need and would do something about it, like that would change the world. People would have a completely different view of what Christians are about. And that's one of the things that we're really passionate about. And that's one of the reasons why James and I work in helping Christians be able to live into that and be good stewards, because we have to steward the resources we have. And we all have different amounts of resources, and we are supposed to steward them well. And the thing is with the Samaritan, he was a good steward of his resources. He had money available to him. And we look at the Levite and the priest, and they just walked by. They probably had the resources to do something about it, but they didn't go out of their way to do that. And that's something that, kind of haunts me of what would I do if I was in that scenario? And the reality is that it's very easy to just get stuck in the day-to-day living and to live in survival mode, to live paycheck to paycheck, and just move, be reactionary to our lives. But we really need to step back and pay attention to the things God is calling us to do, because if we could be missing things that are right in our vision and just walk past needs because we just are so focused on our own needs ourselves. Can you pull up the verse, please? It's Ephesians 2:10. So I truly believe that God has given each of us dreams and desires. And the real reason is that he's got good things in store for us. Ephesians 2:10 says, "For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them." God has good things in store for us, and we need to walk in those things. But sometimes those things can be scary. They can maybe feel unrealistic. Maybe we have to change what we're doing in our lifestyle. And that can be a scary thing to really start walking into those things that God's calling us to do.
So now it's time for application. We're going to have a time to actually put this into action. This is the exciting part. But while I was sitting over here, I started thinking about another verse. Because when we talk about dreaming, sometimes we're thinking like, well, I mean, I've got this thing that I really want to do, but is it really selfish of me to do that? Because why go after that? Because am I actually helping anybody? Here's the reality. Psalms 37:4, "Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart." What if God has given you desires so that he can give you desires? And what we want to do right now as we're dreaming is to sift away those messages that we've had growing up that have been giving you this story that you've been living out. What if we can strip that away and we can just see the desires that God's given us so that he can begin giving us those desires? This is how we did it. So if you'll put up the picture of this beautiful hot tub that we have. So years ago, we bought this hot tub for $200 on the Nextdoor app. We were so excited. It's not the most comfortable, it's not the most luxurious, but this was our dream machine. So when Amberlee and I got in this hot tub, we would dream about the future. There was one in particular dream session that we sat in there for 3 hours, just dreaming up yes, I know what you're asking. We were very pruny, but it was so worth it. What we did was we sat down and we said, okay, if nothing held us back, if time wasn't a constraint, if money was no issue, what would our future life look like? And we just began dreaming and coming up with one thing after another after another. We're like, we are so excited to step into this. And we came up with a bunch of stuff out of that.
Yeah, so one of the things that came up for us is that we wanted to have really deep relationships with our neighbors, like the people that live right next door to us. We also wanted to have quality time with our kids. At that point, our kids were 2 and 4, so they were still quite young. We wanted to work together, and that was something we had never really even thought or contemplated before, and we didn't know what that would look like at that point. We wanted to travel as a family, and we also wanted to serve as a family. And a 2 and a 4-year-old, that's kind of hard to figure out, like, what can we do serving with our kids?
And one thing I wanted to say, before we had that hot tub session, we were in a season where we felt like we weren't making progress in anything. We were very reactive to the things that came to us. That was shifting where we would go and put our focus. And after this hot tub session, it really made it to where we could be proactive and actually move in a direction, and it felt really good. It gave us hope.
Yeah, so we have a question for you to ponder. So if you could put that question up, please. This is one you're going to be writing down. It says, what is a dream you sense God may have placed on your heart, whether big or small? What is one thing you feel called to pursue, even if it seems unrealistic or daunting? Now, I'm going to pray before we go and ask God what that is, because we want God to be the one helping us figure out what that is. It's not just something that we're selfishly wanting.
Amberlee, if you're on campus and you didn't get one of these, or if you need a pen, if you raise your hand while Amberlee is praying, we'll have ushers come around with these handouts and with pens. So just keep your hand up and then close your eyes.
God, I just ask that you would highlight to us the things that you have put inside of us. Lord, each of us have some unique thing that you have decided that is for us to go for. And Lord, I just ask that you would bring it to our minds right now, that you would even surprise us, that even if it seems unrealistic or impossible, that we wouldn't push it back, that we would just know what you have for us, God. I just ask that you would bring it to us. In your name, amen. So we're going to give you some time to answer this question so you can write it down.
All right, your time's almost up, but this is just the beginning of this exercise, so this is something you can keep working on later.
I love that Brent brought us into this waiting this morning. And this is what we're doing right now, is that we're waiting and listening to what God has for us, because it's really easy to just be so busy that we don't take time to step aside and ask God what he has for our lives.
So as we move into the next part, this is the reverse engineering part. So back to the story about us in the hot tub, dreaming, having this amazing time and getting excited. If we had just stopped there, it would have been pretty useless. It would have been kind of an entertaining evening. But what we did is we stepped into the next part, and that's what we're going to be doing with what you just came up with. We want you to go the next step and say, okay, what is it going to take for me to get there? This is the reverse engineering side. So we had talked about we wanted deeper relationships with our neighbors, quality time with kids. We wanted to work together. We wanted to travel as a family, serve as a family. Those were just a few of the things that came up for us. We're going to take some time. We're actually going to show you some of the examples of what the reverse engineering looked like for us, just to give you some ideas. But understand and know this. You guys are going to have a completely different subset of things because we're all different. God's put something different inside of each of us because he has a different mission for all of us. Don't feel like what we're putting here are just like the smorgasbord. I want that, I want that, I want that. You get to come up with your own thing. God's got something really special for you guys. And so back to the hot tub session. As we were thinking about, okay, this looks amazing and exciting. How do we get there? Where are we now? How do we get there? The biggest thing that we realized was we wanted to get out of debt. That was something that we felt like God was saying, if you get out of debt, that's going to help get us quicker to the things that I have for you. And as we started reverse engineering that, we went one step further. We're like, okay, our current engineering in terms of our income isn't going to get there, not fast anyway. And so we realized we need additional sources of income. Here's the thing about God. If he gives you desires in your heart, he's going to give you the things you need to get there. The very next day after that hot tub session, guess what I got? A phone call with a job offer that I was not looking for 130% increase in pay.
And he wasn't even going to take it. He was like, do you think we should? I'm like, we just had this conversation yesterday.
Yes.
I'm pretty sure God's giving us something right in our laps.
I did say, I don't really think this is for me. And then he's like, well, can I tell you how much you'll make? And I was like, okay. And then I was like, you know what? Maybe this is an open door. I don't know. So needless to say, I took that job. We began living intentional with our finances right then. We lived off of 25% of our income, and we threw everything at our house. And we paid off our house within a year of getting that job, which was really cool and exciting. So we want to show you some of the engineering that we did to accomplish some of these dreams we had.
Yeah, and I do want to just preface that we didn't get we're going to go through like a laundry list of things that we've been able to do, but it wasn't something that was instantaneous. It's something that we've just adapted and really started to be more intentional with our lives, and it's just changed throughout the years. And so don't expect that when you have a dream session that you're going to have a download of exactly what you need to do. It will change, and you're not going to be able to get everything done all at once. But we really broke it down into categories. There were some small changes that we made, and then we had some medium changes, and then some really large, drastic changes. So an example of a small change that we had is we wanted to have more intentional time as a family. We really had a calling for doing dinners together as a family, and so we actually have a candle at our table at all times, and we light it for dinner time, and we have conversation starters, and it really helps us to slow down and enjoy our time as a family, and we have a lot better conversations together.
Yeah, to build on that, we started doing nightly devotions with the kids, and we also started doing that at breakfast as well.
Yeah, and we also wanted to know our neighbors, and it's important to know their names. If we just are like, hey, I don't know, you live in that house, the yellow house people, like that's not very helpful. So we created a diagram and have written down the names of all of the neighbors that live near us.
So these are just some small examples of the things that we did for the small changes. Some of the medium changes we did is we realized that our TV was getting in the way of intentional time. It was so easy just to sit there, turn on the TV, and blank out for a while. So we actually gave up something so that we could have a more rich life. We gave up our TV, we bought a projector, and we decided that when we wanted to watch something, it became this friction, this point of friction. Okay, is this gonna be something that's gonna bring intentionality, or is it just gonna be something to waste time? And so we would bring the projector out, we would set it up, gives us enough time to pop popcorn and sit down as a family and have that be a really rich, intentional time.
Yeah, we wanted to serve as a family, and so we've been able to serve here at our church, which I love that there are so many opportunities to do that. We help out at the food pantry and greeting.
Yeah, and then weekly date nights is something that we started with our kids. Amberlee takes one of the kids one week, I take the other, and then each week we switch back and forth. Really simple things. We might go out to eat, we might spend money, we might just go on a hike.
Yeah, so we do that on Tuesdays. And so we also have done some large changes. And one of the large changes that we've done is that we've been having a weekly Sabbath. So we do that on Friday nights. We started off with a really big feast, and it takes time. We get our house spotless or as close as we can and prepare a lot of food for our dinner. And we bless our kids, and we really just spend intentional time. We have all these different questions that we do. It's just like this rhythm that we've created. And then we have 24 hours of rest. I don't have my phone. A lot of times I put it in our lockbox, so I don't even use it. I'm not on social media, and I just get a break. And it's been really life-giving, and we really just go through two questions. Is this glorifying to God, and is this life-giving? And if it's not, we don't do it during that 24 hours.
Yeah, and one of the hard things for our dream about having deeper relationships with our neighbors was, how do we do that without just going knocking on the door and being weirdos? And so we moved all of our backyard activities to our front yard. We now have a play set in the front where the kids play out there. We bring picnics out there. We have our garden in the front yard. One thing that we did that has been just transformational for us getting to know our neighbors was we bought a fire pit and we set that out in the front yard, and we've made it very well known that if the fire is on, that's an open invitation. And typically when we put that out there, we'll have, I think on average, like 18 neighbors just stop by. It might be for 5 minutes, it might be 2 minutes, it might be the whole time, but that was something that was really intentional and helped us.
Yeah, and then another example is homeschooling. That wasn't something we had even on the docket, but that's been a big change for our lives as well.
Yeah, so not all of the things that we wanted to do during our dream session has come into play. We still have time to do that. And there will be things that you guys come up with that it's gonna take a while. For example, we wanna travel and do missions with our kids. We've not gotten to that place yet, but we're heading towards that. It's about finding new rhythms to get you to the place that you're stepping into the life that God has for you. But it's not just adding, it's also subtracting. Anytime you say yes to something, you have to say no to about 20 different things. That's why we got rid of our TV, and there's a laundry list of things that we have said no to intentionally so that we could say yes to the things that we feel like God was bringing us to. So this brings us to question number 2. The first question was all about dreaming. This one is, what is that one domino that if you push over is gonna help you get to that dream faster? So the question is, what are 1 or 2 tangible steps you could take to start walking in the good works God has prepared for you?
All right, so I know that the amount of time you've had in here is not enough to adequately dream up this ideal life. And so we have some homework for you. If you look on the back side of your paper, it has the homework to dream up your ideal life, praying and asking God about that, and then reverse engineering. So you can definitely check that out. There's also a QR codes for more resources. We also have created it's a mini course to walk you through this, and that's on the website. You can use this link as well if you want to go deeper. So that's the resource as well.
Thank you, guys. Yeah. These concepts and practices are huge. And again, we're going to deliver some more practical tools, especially during that one-day seminar on Saturday. But these are all foundational concepts because we're talking about changing our habits. And so I want to encourage you to take the time this week to go through those questions, go through them personally, go through them if you're married, go through them with a spouse. But take the time to actually do this because this has the potential to radically change the way that we live our lives and our capacity to discover and then walk in the dreams God has for us. As we close this morning, we're going to do one last thing, and that's I'm going to ask the worship team to come back. And the thing I was personally challenged by this week as we were in this concept is recognizing that this principle of knowing what you want and having a dream and living towards it, that can be used in a really humanistic way. We could actually just empower things that aren't God's best for you. They're not God's dream for you. They could actually be something that's less than that. Not necessarily even bad, but just less than that. And so, part of what Jesus was doing in this whole story with the parable was he was exposing heart conditions that needed to be formed. His disciples needed to be formed into his image where they carried his compassion, the same compassion that he moved towards the crowds with. He's like, this guy's doing it and you guys aren't. And so as we close, we're gonna, if I just ask you to stand if you're here on campus, if you're able, we're gonna do a song it's an older song, but it's newer to us. It's not one that we do a lot, but it's a Vineyard song and it's called Form Us. And as I was preparing this week, I felt like I found myself singing this song personally as a prayer, saying, God, would you form me and would you form us so that what we bring to the world and the dreams that we allow ourselves to dream have been shaped by your compassion. And so this is a prayer. As you sing this today, I would just invite you to make it a prayer where you're giving God permission and the invitation to shape you and to awaken the dreams that he's put in your heart. That verse that Amberlee shared with us, that long ago God made things for us to walk in. God has a dream for your life. Whether you have it or not, God has a dream and he has plans. And as we yield ourselves and open ourselves to him, we're asking him to speak those things, shape those things, empower those things, and resource those things. So let's make this our closing prayer, and then we'll go make the invisible God visible.